and welcome to the Planning Advisory Committee meeting on the 26th of November 2025. My name is Councillor Coley and I will be chairing this meeting. I would like to remind everyone that this meeting is being live streamed, and if you speak, please use the microphones. We have one report to consider this evening, and I have invited representatives from the local residents, the community review panel, and community organizations. On my left, I have Jennifer Peters, who is the Assistant Director for Planning, Design and Sustainability. On my right, I have Sean O'Brien from Democratic Services, who will be minuting and recording this meeting. We also have two speakers for item number 6, and that is Esra El-Rahman, who is the Project Coordinator for Housing Regeneration and Development. And we also have Laura McLean.
Thank you. I just wanted to know how these representatives were chosen, because there have been some representations made of people who wanted to speak and not been allowed to speak.
So we've, as Laura and Ezra will explain, we've been doing some work on the Charter over the last few weeks, and it's been a mixture of people who haven't been able to come to other sessions already, but already suggested an interest, and we're just trying to get a wider spectrum of people as we can to have an opportunity to input.
Wider spectrum, why have we denied people a voice at this meeting?
Shall I come back in? There's a limit to this. Well, lots of people had already had an opportunity to talk on this topic, as the team will explain. And then this is another opportunity to have a kind of wider discussion in a slightly different forum. But we don't want to, we want to get the people at the table to have a decent opportunity to speak. So we have limited it because of space.
I can understand the lack of space, but there doesn't seem to be any clear directive behind who has been invited and who's been turned away.
Can I suggest we kind of cover that in the background to the work that's already been done on this?
Okay, we also have Laura McLean, who is the area manager for the regeneration team. Okay, moving on to the agenda. Item number 1, apologies for absence and substitution. I have one apology from Councillor Nijjar. Is there any other apologies? Item number 2, are there any urgent matters to be considered? Item number 3, are there any declarations of interest? Item number 4, are there any matters to be considered in private? Item number 5, can we approve the minutes for the meeting held on the 24th of June 2025 as correct record? Okay, item number 6. The community-led regeneration charter. Before I allow Esther to start, I would like to say that I'll be looking forward to questions and comments on the report, both from the committee members and also from our invited guests. Okay, Esther, if you would like to present the report, thank you.
Hello and good evening. My name is Esra Abdurrahman. I'm the project coordinator that sits within the Housing and Development team within the Economy and Sustainability Directorate. And I'm joined with my colleague Laura, who will give her own introduction a bit later on. And today we're here to present on the Community-Led Regeneration Charter. So I'm going to start by setting some context, going through the what and the why, and then we will be going through some insights from the engagement feedback that we've had so far. And apologies to those who have already heard the first few slides. So to start with some context, the Community-Led Regeneration Charter is a council commitment, and the commitment is to set out clear rights for residents to shape and control the decisions being taken in their communities on housing and employment. So before we started to think about what this charter could be and helping us to put together our engagement strategy, we looked at past engagement feedback that we got from various projects that were undertaken across the directorate and the council actually. So projects such as the town centre strategies, the housing strategy, the local plan, the travel charter, and we were really trying to understand from the feedback that we've already received from residents and our communities on the ways that we've been engaging on these types of projects and where we could improve. And so using that kind of built our evidence base for why we need this charter. And so just to say, we're not starting from scratch, we've been building on that feedback since then. And why we need a charter, we know that we could do better in the ways that we've been engaging, particularly on projects that revolve around kind of the built environment, regeneration, development, etc. We know over the next few years that we're going to be delivering more housing across the borough. And we don't want to be delivering housing in isolation, so we will be delivering regeneration in each of our 7 towns. So looking at place more holistically. And in order to do that successfully, we know that we need to have a more kind of meaningful and clear and consistent approach for how we engage with our communities and residents. And this work is really underpinned by our new Connected Communities vision, particularly Principle 2, which is to give our communities and residents more agency, to give them power and choice, to make sure that their voices are being heard when we're developing, and particularly to give a voice to those who don't usually engage on these types of projects. And I've touched on the fact that there is a need for us to create a more consistent and clear approach for how we engage. So in terms of the what, the charter is not a statutory document, it's not policy. It will act as a guidance, as best practice for how we should be engaging. It will outline the promises that the council wants to make to its residents and its communities, but also setting clear expectations for what we can and can't do. And the charter will set out how the council will act in 2 key particular roles. So the first is the council as a developer, so leading on its own council projects, whether it's housing or placemaking or regeneration. And it will make sure that this charter is used when putting together engagement strategies and setting best practice. So when we are working with our partners and developers, they understand these high standards and make sure that they are also using this charter and the toolkit, which Laura will explain a bit later on. It will define key principles. So the charter will be, there'll be 2 aspects to it. The first is a short document outlining principles, commitments and priorities. And the second aspect is the toolkit, which will be the practical element. And that will look at the project life cycle from start to finish and beyond, and how we should be engaging, but also what are the key priorities throughout the project life cycle that we should be focusing on. And we'll also be setting out clear roles and responsibilities for council officers, for developers, landowners, and our residents. So we have been engaging over the past few months, and we've been engaging with a range of stakeholders, from developers to landowners to our communities and community organisations, including young people as well. We are still continuing to engage. We have upcoming engagement with 2 local schools. We will be undertaking peer reviews with other councils to look at the feedback that we've gotten so far and what else we need to do. And we will also be establishing a steering group that will support us with implementing the toolkit, and Laura will talk a bit more about that. But just to say, what we wanted for this session is to reflect on some of the feedback that we got via the various work streams. And we've split this up into 2 slides where we've shared reflections on what could good regeneration look like or could be, and that's what you've told us, and then also some of the priorities that you've told us for regeneration. But please know that what we're going to be presenting over the next 2 slides is not kind of the final feedback. It's just a snapshot. We have a lot of feedback that we need to analyze and look through, and we'll be working on a quite detailed engagement report over the next few months. And then this will also include the engagement feedback we get from the toolkit eventually, as we go through that process. So before getting into the key themes for good regeneration, I wanted to ask the representatives that we've invited here today to think about, have we got the feedback right so far? Are we taking the right approach? And should we be unpacking some of these themes in this meeting? So in terms of key themes for good regeneration, you've told us that development should be infrastructure-led, not housing-led, that well-being should be supported by green, healthy, and well-maintained spaces. And that's really kind of looking at the lessons learned from COVID and the fact that a lot of people didn't have access to green space. Development needs to respect heritage and local character. Regeneration should be strengthening and preserving local networks and community spaces. More investment in our cultural spaces, in art, and also in our youth provision. Good regeneration creates well-connected neighbourhoods. That it's not just about the built environment, but it's also about the investment that we put into our local high streets and supporting our local businesses. That we're engaging early and consistently throughout the project life cycle, and also improving the ways that we are communicating so that we're more inclusive in our approach, and that engagement should be ongoing and not a one-off exercise. Creating cleaner, safer, and better managed places. Good regeneration should support social inclusion and help communities thrive together. And it should be well-led, transparent, and we should be delivering on what we're promising. So those are the key themes that have come out of what could good regeneration look like for you. And then I'm going to hand over to my colleague Laura, who'll take us through the priorities.
Thank you, Ezra. So yeah, the key sort of themes and for priorities that's come from, the workshop that we hosted on the 12th of November, along with all the other engagement that we've done today, is community infrastructure first. So that kind of we're considering the opportunities for schools and health and transport. and it shouldn't necessarily just be housing led. Strong, accessible, well-run community spaces as kind of prioritising community buildings as core social infrastructure. Green space, nature and environmental responsibility, respecting local character and heritage. This has been quite a prominent feature within our discussions, and particular about, you know, when it comes to sort of estate regeneration, retaining the names of places, the artwork, and like murals as well. The sort of social cohesion, integration and community well-being, kind of considering the new and the new communities, but also thinking about the existing communities that are there as well. Genuine engagement, power sharing and local voices, effective governance, delivery enforcement. This sort of picks upon the point of like guaranteed transparent delivery of projects and strong leadership and integrity. Vibrant, local, inclusive high streets. You know, we're mindful that, you know, like local businesses are kind of, you know, part of that community, and they have local knowledge and are really important to our community members. Culture, identity and youth opportunities, safe, cleanliness and public realm. So ensuring safer and cleaner and better managed neighbourhoods, which kind of leans on a lot of the kind of engagement feedback from Your Voice, Your Town as well. I'll touch upon, apologies, like we have, maybe some people in the room have sort of seen the engagement toolkit, but we are really keen, and from January to March, we're going to be working with a number of community members, maybe between 8 and 10, to sort of help design what the toolkit should be, and identify, which will include identifying opportunities for training, and will be shaped by communities on how, when and where local people should be involved. We're conscious that we want to bring good jobs to the local to the borough, and the kind of throughout the whole regeneration process, there's like different opportunities for that upskilling, and you know, it might spark an interest in planning, design, through to engineering, even, you know, quantity surveying. There's such a breadth of opportunities for upskilling our residents. Yeah, we're really keen to sort of make sure that, like, across all council projects, that this toolkit will be used. We're conscious that it will be a guide for external partners, but we're really hoping that, you know, the council can sort of be the point of best practice and encourage our kind of third parties to uphold the standards that we do. The draft idea of kind of looking at other boroughs and other organisations that have toolkits is that it could be split over a project life cycle, from the concept idea to like design, to the tendering, construction, to the handover. But from the outset, it's about embedding those engagement approaches from the outset, and thinking of those connected community principles, who the community steering group should be, who are the key stakeholders, making sure local knowledge is sort of, you know, embedded throughout, but also thinking of, like, you know, are we working with the schools that actually neighbour these regeneration projects? And throughout the projects, being very clear on what that kind of comms plan is with local residents and the local stakeholders in the area, because from, you know, by kind of setting the standards from the outset, it just means that when it comes to that handover and legacy piece, that, you know, the places are well maintained and have been well curated and designed for the people who are going to be living there. And it also means that the project just doesn't end, that there will be those, we want to consider that the project has, like, you know, future communications with whoever's going to be managing the asset, but it's making sure that we are, like, considering, yeah, the whole life cycle. We'll just touch upon timelines. Like Ezra's kind of mentioned, the sort of engagement activities have been going on for a couple of months, but that it will be ongoing. But our intention is that in the charter, which will be quite a short document, which will outline our priorities and the principles and the commitments, will be going to Cabinet in February. And then we will be working on the toolkit from January to March, to design the toolkit with a steering group, which will be over 3 workshops plus maybe a couple of online sessions. But we're kind of looking at sort of we'll have that in the steering group in place by the end of this year. But we're looking for a range of voices and representation from across the borough.
I just wanted to touch on the point about how we invited representatives tonight for this meeting. So a wider email was sent out to various stakeholders, asking them if they would like to join under the kind of the various stakeholder categories. And then we did have, I wouldn't say a lot of responses, but we had a few responses, and then we took a view on who wouldn't usually engage in this type of forum, and we invited them to attend tonight, especially if we've already had one-to-one discussions with various other groups. Thank you.
Thank you, Mesra and Laura. As I said, now I'm opening up for questions and comments from the committee and the invited guests. Councillor Mahmood.
Thank you very much, Chair. It's a good piece of work. Just wondering, we will be, thank you, I can't see the 20 minutes neighborhood zone. Would that be somewhere in that priorities where we will be doing regeneration? So is it 20-minute? We talked a lot about that in the last couple of months. So I'm just wondering, it should be included in that, or would that be the 20-minute neighborhood zone is a part of this regeneration charter or not? And the second thing, I'm just looking at your slide. You said community engagement update. It's called the community survey and the reply for 34 response. I'm just wondering, out of how many 34 response are we? How did you engage community or community group on that point? That's all for the time being, Chair.
Oh, do you want to take, or do you want me to? Yeah.
You want to take 2 questions?
Yeah, yes.
Councillor Martin.
So I just wanted to get a sense from the officers, I suppose, about how the feedback you've been getting through this process. Because if I looked at some of the slides that you've had up, some of the things that the community may have been asking for are the sort of things we also put in a Section 106 requirement. Transport links, schools, all that. And are the community thinking we're not doing a very good job on that, or is it just happening that what the community are asking for and what we're trying to do are kind of matching each other in some areas? So I wasn't quite sure what the gap is from what the feedback you're getting. So that's sort of my question.
So do you want?
I was at the meeting that took place on the 12th, and I think from what you were saying, sometimes I don't know exactly what's in Section 106, but I think from looking at the proposed charter, and one of the questions that Ezra asked is, have we got the feedback right? And I think a lot of what we said then has actually been proposed. I think sometimes when you're sort of doing the housing, it's always like build houses, but it's not always about the infrastructure. And I think that's one of the things that maybe you do think about it, but we feel in the community that sometimes it's not always there, because obviously we're thinking about the buses, the schools, and, you know, sometimes we feel it's not always there. So I think we wanted to make sure that these things are important, and they are there because it's important to us.
I still would like to take these questions. But no, we'll do that afterwards. Yes.
So my name's Kathy Swift and I'm a resident representative, but I also run LagerCan, which is the litter action group. That's not really anything to do with my question. Something that came up in...
Can we take your question? She's got 3 questions. If she could answer.
Oh, sorry.
I will call you.
Sure. I thought.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mahmood, for your question regarding the 20-minute neighbourhood. Yeah, so it will sit beside the 20-minute neighbourhood guidance, and we're kind of referencing it. We're not kind of seeking to duplicate that piece of work. This is about how you approach regeneration. But yeah, embedding the principles from the guidance as well. We'll be referencing the document within the charter, but it won't be. Yeah, it will be used.
Yeah, and just to add to that as well, I think this really kind of falls under what's been kind of fed back to us in terms of creating well-connected neighborhoods and also thinking about infrastructure, not just housing and isolation when we're developing. So we would be making sure that we're implementing those kind of 20-minute principles in the developments. So, sorry, Jo.
I was just going to come back in on Councillor Martin's point around Section 106, because I think that is a good point. I guess what this is meant to be perhaps more upfront in terms of the process than the planning process. So we would hope that, you know, most applicants, particularly on big schemes, would be thinking about all the things that's kind of on the list there. But I think another thing that this draws out for my team in planning in particular is that, well, and my infrastructure team, is that one, things take a long time to deliver. Sometimes there's not much we could do about that. But 2, we need to do a better job as a council of explaining what has been delivered and how, like when stuff is being delivered through a scheme, and that we publicise that. And you'll know that we've been working on our infrastructure funding statements, for example, that we're meant to do every year, that set out this is what we got through a development and this is what we've delivered from that. And I think that will really help residents understand, okay, that was delivered, okay, it was a couple of years later, or this is why it's happened now, and the phasing of things. So this is useful feedback, I think, for that.
And then to touch on the survey question you asked, Councillor Mahmood. So just to say, we sent out a communication to a large stakeholder list. We also put the communication on our council's engagement page. We utilise our council's community champions and various other departments, such as the town teams, to send out the communication to our communities to take part in this consultation. We appreciate that a survey is not everyone's kind of best way to send in feedback, which is why we also proposed one-to-one meetings with community organisations if they were willing to have us. And we held a workshop last week with various stakeholders from across the community, so residents, developers, etc., and community organisations to attend and give us their feedback. So whilst the number 34 looks small, we were quite, you know, active in our outreach, and we really opened ourselves up to attend and present on the charter to various stakeholders from across the borough, and that's what we've been doing for the past few weeks and will continue to do into the new year.
Councillor Mahmood, do you want to come back before?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chair. Good to know that your communication method with community group. Can I just suggest that? Could you include a various faith group in your consultation as well, which is very vital in our borough? Thank you.
Okay, Kathy, if you like. Oh, sorry.
It's okay. So I was sorry. Now?
Go ahead.
Okay. I was at the 12th of November meeting as well, and a hot topic on our table was Peter George said that we've got these housing targets and they were going to go up. And a hot topic on our table was, are we building houses for people to live in, or are we building property for people to invest in and not necessarily to be lived in? And was there any scope for pushing back on those housing targets, given the amount of empty property there is in our borough? So that was something I don't know if the idea was to capture that level of detail in the feedback so far, but that was something we discussed at length in our group.
There's no other interest, so if you want. Councillor Wall?
Yeah, just. Oh, that's on now, right. Just on the feedback and engagement with people. I mean, I've sat in for many different panels, etc., but 34 seems a very small number in terms of responses. There's almost 34 people in the room. So I'm just, do you feel satisfied that you whatever means you did to get those responses is good enough? And is there a different way of doing things that gets more than, 34 responses? It just doesn't feel right to me in terms of, all the people that engage. I mean, there's plenty in this room, but there's plenty outside of this room. And I mean, the list of that you've captured is laudable, actually, because I think that's probably what most people would say anyway. But I'm just wondering, have we missed a trick here in terms of how we got out to engage with people? I represent the ward in Hanmore. I didn't see anything about Hanmore in there at all. And if you can get to people in Northolt in terms of a residents group, there must be loads, because Northolt's a very hard to reach area. So, there's I don't know. It just doesn't feel right to me. That's all.
Thanks. I'll take the first question. So I guess, it's a slightly broader point in terms of housing numbers, but I guess the regeneration charter is one way that we might sort of help deliver numbers when they come in. So just a bit of context, we know that the government has basically set out some housing targets nationally, and for London that's about 88,000 homes a year. At the moment it's 52,000 homes a year is the target in the London plan, but we're not actually building anywhere near that amount at the moment. So towards the new London plan document came out earlier this year, and then we're expecting a draft London plan in May, I think, probably late May. And that will have housing numbers in it for each borough. And they are based on a whole host of things, need and also potential capacity. But what the GLA have said is that they are looking to find capacity for that 88,000. So we know we expect that the housing numbers for probably every borough will increase. So I guess what we're thinking about, and where kind of Peter George was talking about, is that we will need to consider what are the best places in the borough to accommodate that extra development and extra capacity. And part of this work also helps us ensure that that's done in a way that involves residents and involves existing communities and new communities to deliver places that are successful on the lines of the 20-minute neighbourhoods and sustainable and things like that. So they're slightly separate, but they're definitely linked.
Thank you, Councillor Wall, for your question. So just to kind of reiterate what I stated earlier, we did use various methods to conduct outreach. We used internal departments. We went through our council's webpage. We've held one-to-one meetings. We've attended forums. We're going to be attending schools in the new year. And we held a workshop. We've also been using our town teams to carry out outreach. We went to Bolo Westbrook Youth Centre a few weeks ago, and we spoke to 20 young people, and that was an incredible experience and really insightful in terms of the young people's experience through kind of the South Acton Estate regeneration and what they need through this charter, and how they would like to be involved in the toolkit once we open the engagement for that in the new year. We are continuing to engage, and we'll do so, and we are open to getting support from councillors also to get the word out there, especially within their wards. But yeah, by all means, I think, yeah, if you have kind of other suggestions for how we could be undertaking engagement, that's welcomed. I mean, it is also worth saying that although the numbers shown on the screen are small, the feedback that we got was quite rich in terms of what we could use and how we could use that to develop the charter. All these conversations and presentations we've held were really constructive, and we felt that it produced a wealth of knowledge and feedback that could actually be used. So sometimes it's not about the quantity, it's also about the quality of the responses that we receive.
Councillor Martin.
It's just a suggestion really, but I was just thinking, you know, we've got the town teams, we're sort of overlapping in the sort of work we're doing, whether or not it's worth, you know, cascading some of this to the town teams as well. If you want to get more people involved, then you've kind of got a ready-made audience within those as well.
Yeah, we did. We utilised the town
You didn't
teams.
do it in Northolt town team that I was aware of.
Oh, I mean, so we sent the communication out, and we went through the offices that are responsible for each of the town teams. Okay, apologies for that. We'll chase them up on that.
Okay, just can't, it's. Okay, David.
Right, it's working. Right, I'm very interested how you mentioned having new buildings to be sympathetic with what's around it. I live in Hanwell, and it's still basically a villagey feel about it. And we've got one building in the Uxbridge Road, which is white plastic clad, and it sticks out like a sore thumb, to be honest. There'll be other future projects nearby coming on, and I feel it's very important, especially people coming up from Southall up the hill, to see this white blob, for want of a better word. It's if it's the exterior of buildings that lots of people, it's not just my opinion, it's others locally, it's the exterior brick to be similar to what's around it makes all the difference. What's inside doesn't matter that much. It's the exterior that changes the feel of the atmosphere of the area.
Thank you, David, for your question. Is there anyone else wants to ask any other question? Jeffrey, yes, go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'm a town planner, but I'm representing Ealing Matters tonight. I'd like to say, by way of starting, that it's very encouraging to see Ealing launching this initiative of community-led development. However, as with all of these things, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. And my experience around the world over the last 55 years has demonstrated that any policy or project initiative depends for its success on the level of public trust it can generate. So we're very, very keen to see that the initiatives that we've had collectively, Ealing Matters and other local groups, are genuinely engaging, And I did have a number of questions. I'll keep this very short because I was told I wasn't going to be allowed to present tonight. So I was very happy when it was pointed out that my name was designated. So thank you very much for this opportunity. The questions we have relate particularly to page 10 of the agenda, which states that the council and our partners, quote, and raises the question of who are the partners? Are they operating on the same criteria and objectives as the council? If the council is genuinely a means of, if the charter is genuinely a means of achieving community-led regeneration, should long-standing community organisations not be the partners of choice in drafting and helping to implement the charter? This raises the question of what is meant by to engage meaningfully. Who is making the definition of that and on what basis? So those are obvious questions that came to mind when reading through that particular point. I would very much welcome the response of the relevant councillors and officers. But one point just reading through the screen comes to mind, that as an example of this, you talk about the importance of community buildings. And I'm sure I'm not the only person who's thinking that Victoria Hall comes to mind in that respect. So that's a sort of key trigger point, if you like, by which the relationship between the council is being tested at the moment, not necessarily to everybody's satisfaction, obviously. But I raise those questions in the hope that we can have a discussion about the principles of the Charter and who will be involved in helping to draft and help implement it. Thank you very much indeed for the opportunity.
Hi, so firstly, thank you, David, for your comment. I think I know which building you're talking about. It's the one in Hanwell. Yes, yeah, that's the one, yeah. So just to say, I think, you know, through the feedback that we've gotten so far from the engagement we've done, there is a lot about kind of looking at local character, maintaining that local identity, and I think within that is also looking at quality of design, and making sure that we're not that we are kind of working closely with our architects, so not our architects, but the developers that are kind of bringing forward these designs, making sure that they are in keeping with local character, and that the design of the architecture is of a higher quality than what we've seen so far in the borough. It is also worth noting that we now have an internal urban design team that sits within our planning department, and that's a fantastic kind of new kind of aspect to the team that's kind of working closely with our planners to make sure that architecture and design is well considered throughout the process. But I'll let Jen say a bit more on that.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess it's thinking also about what this document is and what it isn't. So we've sort of already mentioned that we've got lots of planning policy, both at the local level and at the regional level, and lots of guidance that we as officers and the committee will adhere to and implement, you know, and consider when they're considering applications, and when we're in pre-app discussions with applicants, we'll have those conversations. So a lot of these things we will always be flagging. And it also is in that context of, you know, optimising capacity on sites as well, which is what we do need to do to deliver the homes and infrastructure and jobs that we need. Ezra's mentioned we've got the new urban design team been in place for about a year now, just over a year actually, and that's been really good in terms of influencing that at the kind of early discussion level. In particular, we also have our design review panel and our community review panels, which have been going now for a a couple of years. So I think we are improving how we take into those things into account. I think what's interesting about the feedback is that, and this is just sort of going on the slides, is I think what perhaps some of that's around as well is those things that are less around, you know, your standard character and conservation is more around those more social elements. If you're thinking about murals, if you're thinking about spaces that people find important, that sort of thing is harder to capture perhaps in a planning document, but will be able to be captured when an applicant or if it's the council scheme is going on site and feeling, okay, how do we make this place work for the people that live here already or the people that might move in? So I think that feels like a really interesting element to what's come out in the discussions. Another quick point I'd make, the mention around kind of community buildings and community and infrastructure that comes up, and not you know, because this is a really good piece of work and a really exciting thing that we're doing, but we are also working within the confines of the reality of financial situations, for example. So a lot of the issues we have with community spaces is who pays for them to be run, who keeps them maintained, and that can be the same space with same issue with open space, green spaces, etc. So all of those things we're flagging here as things we have to think about. You know, how do you make that work in a place and in the reality of the current kind of environment as well. In terms of the kind of who, I mean, what we're talking about here in terms of it's as Ezra explained at the start, this is a voluntary piece of guidance. We can't make anyone adhere to it, but as a council we will follow it, or the plan is that we follow it when we're the developer and we're developing, and that in that way we show best practice and set the standard. And then we also in kind of big developers in the borough and other developers, that we encourage them to use it as well and implement it, but we can't because it doesn't have any statutory weight, we can't make them do that. But I think we've got good good relationships and with different kind of communities of practice that we can help ensure that it does get taken on board at the right time. I don't know if Ezra, you wanted to come back on any of those other points around kind of who's it for.
Yeah, I mean, just the point on partnership, when we say the council and our partners, under this context, what we mean is our communities, our residents, community organisations, the developers we work with, the landlords we work with. So the people that we work with that have an impact on the borough or are impacted on. So that sounded quite wrong, not impacted on, but the people that are experiencing regeneration and development. So it's not just reserved for developers or the people that we work closely with to make that regeneration happen. It's the communities that we should be engaging with. It's the residents that need to be involved in that project life cycle that we set out in the introduction.
But I also would like to add, I sit in regeneration investments and jobs, which sits outside of planning. So we have these kind of developer forums where we can influence, and sort of we'll be bringing this charter to them once it's in the public domain in February, to sort of, you know, when there's new developments coming forward, we'll be sharing them with them, like, you know, this is what communities want to see, have you considered this? So there is that kind of influence that can happen outside of the planning process.
You. Any other questions? Councillor Sharma? And
thank you, Chair. I just wanted to know, how will officers monitor whether the commitments in the charter are being delivered? Are you able to say something about that, please? Thank you.
Councillor Mahmood, if you could ask your question.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Good to know that the charter is the first. The priorities community infrastructure, which is always a conflict point between the planning and the community, because when we are doing development and not enough social or community infrastructure, that is always bone of contention. That good to know that that is the top priority. But on the top of that, if we are looking for the future generation, I think we should be considering, this is my suggestion, in terms of digital infrastructure as well, which is be very useful for the generation to come in the borough. And when, like you said, Laura, when you are sharing this piece of work with the new developer, they wanted to invest in the borough and build things in there. So yeah, like more data center, more digital infrastructure, which can support the future AI generation. Thank you.
I'll answer the first question about how the council will monitor commitments. That's where the toolkit comes into play, because it could be used essentially as a checklist and will help guide officers who are working in regeneration or any sort of, project about, have they got a community steering group? Who are your local stakeholders? And this is what we want to be working with to design from January to March. We have an idea of what should be there, but we want the community to be designing it. But that's where maybe sort of measuring those commitments and making sure that at each stage of the project that there are those targets, like, have you got work experience in place? Have you, are there training opportunities? Have you brought in your consultants to meet with the residents to potentially do teach-ins and upskilling opportunities? So that's where, the toolkit will hopefully come into fruition and use.
Councillor Wall.
Sorry, I'm just on number one in terms of community infrastructure first. I would have thought it's kind of like a bit of give and take, that both needs to come at the same time. It's not, you can't build schools and hospitals and transport if you haven't got anyone to fill them. It just doesn't make sense to me. It should be a bit of hand in glove with these, and that's what we do with Section 106, and that's what we do in a normal planning system. So I would have thought that we've had a massive infrastructure, which is Crossrail, Elizabeth Line, and that's kind of led away in a sense. But schools, health, housing follow it, and in some respects, and in some areas, people are not happy that housing has followed Crossrail, really. But it's a bit of both, give and take here, really, because the number of times we've done Section 106 and for health premises, and they're not filled, they're just not taken up. And schools, the roles are falling now in a lot of cases, certainly primary schools, and that bulge or lack of bulge will now go through to secondary schools. So it's, but it's still there's still a need for housing in terms of people on the housing list, and rental properties that are too expensive for people, etc., etc. There's certainly a need for social housing. So, I wouldn't not want to do housing without these things in place. I just, they'll follow in a lot of cases. So I'm just a little bit confused that we're actually putting that out there as that's all we're going to do, and everything follows the infrastructure.
I'm just going to quickly answer that. So just to say, I think maybe the wording there is slightly misleading. I don't think it's saying that we will be putting in infrastructure first and not thinking about housing. I think it's the principle of understanding what a place needs first and making sure that we're thinking about this when we're also designing houses, and that everything is thought about holistically and not just housing in isolation.
If I could come in there as well, yeah, I think that's, and just to confirm, Ezra and Laura, these are kind of what's come out of the consultation. It's they're still to be turned into, whether it's the charter or not. So this is just kind of flagging those kind of key points. But I think that's right, that through planning and the 20-minute neighbourhoods that we've kind of talked about, we'd expect, either through our own knowledge as the council or through an applicant coming forward, a good understanding of what is needed. And we have those long negotiations about what we should put on a site and where. But I think it also comes to that point of making sure that that conversation is had with the community up front. So if there is because you quite often hear from communities that there's a concern about schools, for example, and then when you actually look into it, that need isn't there, or it's not as strong. So it's being able to have those conversations so everyone's aware of the real pressures and where they are, and work out kind of what is the priority, I think will help that. And then also, again, at the point I made earlier around explaining what's been secured, how it will be delivered and when it will be delivered. And that links back to this charter's idea that you will have that communication all the way through, because I think sometimes, a scheme starts, and some of the schemes, in the borough can be 10, 15 years delivery. So when does it come in that programme, that makes sure that people understand it hasn't been forgotten, it's just been scheduled for midpoint or whenever. So part of it's about that understanding of need, as well as making sure that it's delivered. But you're right, just in terms of simple markets, things are not always the infrastructure is not always going to be able to be delivered first or needed to be. But I guess it's about also making sure that if something is a phase scheme and a big development, that each phase can work on its own merits, if it's going to be there for 5 years on its own.
Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Chair. So it might help me a bit actually to understand this going forward a bit better. If you might be doing that later on, it's almost having a few models of what a consultation might look like for particular different things. So, if you're on a housing estate and that's going to be regenerated, you might be consulting with the residents about how that would evolve. Or it could be a bit like what David was saying, that a wider neighbourhood where you're looking at what features do you want to have in the neighbourhood. And it's understanding the sort of types of consultation that we're going to be doing in the future, and sort of laying that out in a way that people can see that it's happening and then how they get to engage in it. So that might be what you're planning to do next. This all sounds really great, and I think the priorities are very sound, but it's making sure that actually does evolve into real practice. And there's got to be lots of different ways of doing it, I think, to meet different circumstances, aren't there?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Councillor Martin. There's still a lot that we haven't figured out yet, and will be over the next few months, especially when we're working on the toolkit. But I think this will need to be tested. And I think it will need to go through a few rounds of testing for us to really understand how it can be impactful and where it can be used and how it can be applied. But yeah, you're right. So we'll have the charter, which will have the priorities and the commitments, and that will guide how we should be engaging. But I think the practical element of this, which is the toolkit, which will look at the project life cycle, I think needs to be tailored in a way that it can be applied to various scales. And I think it's that kind of the question of scale that we haven't figured out yet. And I think we probably will do when we go through our engagement with the steering group on the toolkit.
Councillor Ward.
Sorry, on that, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We have some good and some bad consultations that we've carried out as a council, and I'm sure there's plenty of other councils that have carried out good and bad consultations and been criticised because of bad ones, and the ones that are good no one really knows about, to be honest, because there's one in High Lane Estate which was a great model, which is they took regeneration of the estate. They took the steering group from their estate to another estate that's been regenerated, and they were involved with the officers all the way through. And, you know, the outcome of that was they all voted to basically, not all, obviously not everyone votes, but the majority voted for the regeneration of the estate based on what they'd seen, etc., and how they communicated, etc. So there are good things out there. So it's not reinventing the wheel. What I'm saying is that they're out there to go and get.
Okay, I have a question for Esra. Do you have any best practice examples?
So when we engaged with the local youth at Bollebrook, they actually quoted the Friary Park estate regeneration, particularly the community model that Peabody had set up. So they made sure that the community, so young people, residents, old and new, were involved in the scheme right from the start. And they quoted this as best example because one of the key points that they highlighted was the lack of communication with their own experience. And that communication is key to make sure that even when it comes to kind of setting out expectations of where people can influence and can't influence, that needs to be set out from the outset. And I just don't think that was there, particularly from their kind of own experience. So yeah, so we've been looking at the Friary Park estate and that model and learning from that. And we will be having conversations with Peabody to kind of learn from their model and understand how that was implemented.
Can I also add another good example that we went to visit, which was Poplar Harker, Aberfeldy estate. So they really prioritised with their residents about having a kind of town centre, neighbourhood centre. And so that was where they kind of did the sort of first works around the sort of square. And they also provided in parts of the building that was going to be redeveloped later, they put in meanwhile use. So there was lots of kind of startup opportunities for local small businesses. So they really kind of invested in sort of creating a place rather than it being a kind of, you know, housing happens here and then, you know, maybe some amenity will come, but it was really well considered. And that was a really great case study to see.
I'm from Southall, so just saying something with the experience we had with Parkside Yards. It's a new development which has gone there. So when they initially wanted to do the development, there was lots of objections from residents, and there was lots of things going on. And I mean, it looks fine now. The area looks fine. It's new developed, and but the problem is. When they put the tenants in there, they put the wrong tenants in there, and there's a lot of drugs, and you know, now they have 3 or 4 security people walking around, driving around in cars, in vans, just to patrol the area. So they're doing all this development and all that, and then this kind of things will bring down everything, isn't it? Now. I'm into letting, and we have landlords who've got properties there, and they have a group, a WhatsApp group, and everyone knows where this problem is coming from. Is mainly from those tenants which are put in there by the council. The majority of them investors, like normal residents, they are professionals and they go to work and come back. But these tenants which are put in by the council, they are causing the majority of the problems in Parkside Yards. So if you do you know, you should do a point system, or I don't know, something to say, you know, when you choose the tenants, you know, who is going to go and live. I don't know how to do that, but this is something, because that's putting down everything in the area now. You can go there and see why. I don't understand why there are like 6 security people working all the time, night and day. I have never seen it before in any other places that you need to have security for an estate. So.
I think we'll just note that and then take that away regarding the tenants.
Sorry.
I wonder if the communities will be invited or able to respond to the toolkit, either as it's being evolved or once it has been defined. Would there be some interaction that might be possible on?
Yeah, of course. I mean, that we'll have the steering group, which will be, formed with 8 to 10 residents, which will have in-person workshops. But I think there is opportunity to sort of like circulate it out once we have a draft in place, so we can get further feedback. But respecting the process of the sort of voices and the representation that we have on the steering group as well. So we really want to have some young people on it. We want to have people from across the borough. But yeah, no, of course.
From our initial thinking about the draft toolkit, do you feel there's anything missing?
Well, at the moment, the toolkit is kind of been based on examples that we've sought from other councils and also other people in the built profession. But we are looking to sort of ask to the community, is there anything missing? But I think like during the sessions that we're going to have in January, we're going to sort of be designing it in a way that those workshops in a way where everyone can it can be quite accessible. So we won't be necessarily talking in, like tendering might be, in construction or planning or concepts. We'll just be thinking about when this project is happening at this stage, how would you like to be involved? Like, should we be talking to you? How do you want to be engaged? But yeah, we're sort of seeking that insight along the process.
So when this is finished, the piece of work, and it becomes a charter, are we expecting developers and others to sign up to the charter? Or how is it? Is just a voluntary, or is it? Are we going to encourage them in terms of if you sign up? I don't know. Planning might be. I'm not saying it will be. I'm just saying planning might be easier for you, or there might be a better route. I mean, what is it in there for, and for residents as well, and residents groups, etc. What is it at the end of the day that we're doing with this charter?
So we have means of sort of influence within our kind of procurement process. So as well as being a sort of developer ourselves, we sort of are partnering with third parties. So we will be including the charter within the procurement documents, and we will be expecting our partners to be using the charter.
Sorry, I just wanted, sorry, Councillor, I just wanted to add to that as well. I mean, part of the reason we've also invited our community review panel members to attend tonight and also engage with us through other engagement streams was to ask them, because we think there's an opportunity here to add the guide as part of the checklist to make sure that they are referring to the guide when they're looking at schemes in their review panel sessions, to ask them, like, what is the best way to include the charter within that process, and are there particular things that they should be kind of focusing on? So yeah, I mean, it'd be really kind of great to hear from the community review panel, whether it's now or after this session or throughout the engagement period. Thank you.
mentioned document that we can use when we are reviewing certain planning applications that's coming on board, because obviously David mentioned about making sure that the look of the area is kind of thought about as well, sort of the when they're looking at the, so making sure and holding them to account that they do look at the wider area when they're thinking about planning. They look at the height of the buildings that they're thinking about. And for instance, he mentioned Hanwell, which is where I live as well. So obviously it is very villagey. So sort of planning in that area needs to sort of reflect that, and sort of the height of a building needs to reflect that as well. So don't just take the height of the church and think, well, we can build to the height of the church, which is something that a planning application, I believe, which has gone through, but obviously holding them to account, the colour of the bricks. And I think this charter will help us to do that. And not just on, and also for youth centres as well, making sure that when they're planning, everyone always thinks about the younger children and making sure there's play areas for them. They don't think about the old children that are there, because it's not just babies that live there. So all these things we will be able to sort of, you know, look at the charter and say, well, have you thought of this? So I think it would be a really good tool to sort of help us.
Councillor Mahmood.
Can I just add what we, as you all know, that we have got community review panel, but on the side of that we have got design review panel as well. And as far as I remember, there was 2 or 3 local architects participating on that design review panel as well. So in terms of the building and characters, and I personally, as a part of the planning committee meeting, we always consider your view, community review panel views, and design review panels, and we always consider your views in terms of making planning decision.
That's good to know.
So I would like to ask you, what are the main commitments which are important to our communities? When you when you got all the feedback, what would you say are the main 3 commitments which are most important to our community?
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely answer that, but I think this is definitely a question more for our community that's here today. So it'll be really great to hear from you. But I think the 3 main themes that have come out of our engagement so far has been more focus on youth provision, because as already stated, we are lacking this across the borough, not so much for the young, like the very, very young younger generation, but kind of the adolescence age. There's not a lot out there for them. There's not a lot of space. There's a lot of antisocial behaviour as a consequence, and there's not a lot of support either. Because I mean, these youth provisions isn't just about creating space for them; it's also about the support that is giving them. And then the other 2 are, so one on maintaining identity of place. So one thing that came out really strongly from some of our previous engagements is, you know, when regeneration happens, it almost kind of wipes out what was already there. And it's about kind of making sure that when we are working closely with our communities, that we are kind of maintaining that local architectural identity, whether it's, you know, the colour of the buildings, or, you know, kind of thinking more carefully about the layout, like the materials that are used, etc. And then the other important theme that came out was maintaining local connections and networks. There was a lot of feedback regarding kind of new residents coming in to places, and there hasn't been a lot of integration between the old residents and the new residents. And so thinking about how we can, you know, create better relationships between those between those residents, and supporting existing local networks, because they are really important and sustainable for communities. You know, when you're relying on your neighbor 2 doors down to kind of support you with, you know, your weekly shopping, or, you know, you want to kind of leave your apartment and have a conversation with the family down the road, and suddenly those kind of networks and local social connections are no longer there, then that really impacts people's well-being. So yeah, I think those are kind of the 3 main themes that have come out, but it'd be really great to hear from others.
The Payne first, and then followed by Mr. Kumar. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it's very fair to acknowledge that local governments around the country, certainly in Ealing, are facing enormous pressures from central government. Build, build, build is the pressure that makes it very difficult for you to necessarily decline projects which are not necessarily the sort of things that many people would like to see. When I was on the community review panel for 2 or 3 years, a common reaction to a proposal was that it was overdevelopment of a particular site and too high rise and so on. That was a common concern. At the same time, you are under pressure to deliver, and you're likely to face penalties if you don't deliver according to the targets. And the targets are probably, well, going to be difficult to achieve. If you haven't achieved more than 2,000 so far, increasing that to over 3,000 is an enormous challenge. So I think many of us around the table and generally fully recognize the challenge you face. And not only that, but the development or the build out is in the gift, as you say, of the developer. So it's very difficult for the council, I think, to balance the needs of the community and the pressures that you're under. I think we fully recognize that. All of us, I think, would do whatever we can in a constructive way to help balance that dilemma. So I'd just like to put that on record. So I don't want to be seen as being negative. Thank you very much.
Councillor Kumar.
Yeah, so again, I'm talking about Southwold. That's what I know best. So there's lots of developments going on, not just Parkside Yards, on the other side of the station as well, where Sunrise building was. And the traffic infrastructure is the problem there, because there's only one bridge over on top of where the station is. And right now, on busy times, from the station all the way up to the Western International Market, the traffic is like standstill. You just move slow. So that's not even done. The development is not done. So I don't think they're not going to do anything extra for that traffic. So it's going to be a standstill traffic, I think, after everyone has moved in. And I don't think there was any schools built for the after Parkside Yards and all the. And same with, there's no additional GPs in the area as well. So these are the things I think, in my opinion, is not correctly done. Like, yeah.
Just take one more question. Kathy, please.
So reference has been made today to the I can't remember what the town teams and the survey that was done in the 7 towns. And I think 5 of the 7 towns, their priority was a clean and pleasant environment, which is something that I spend a lot of my time thinking about. And I was in a meeting with Street Services this morning, and they expressed a plea for me to pass on that as all these developments take place, that the council's cleansing budget rises in line, because even if the new developments have got bins for their residents, there's been a massive increase in out-of-home eating and drinking, massive increase in rubbish generated outside the home, and the council's budget for dealing with that has not risen in line. So I agree with that, and I'm passing it on behalf of Street Services as well.
Right, following on from what Ray Wall said, Councillor Ray Wall, my concern is that a lot of effort has been put into this. At the end of the day, the developers don't really have, because this is a best practice guidance. In reality, the developers, not the council as a developer, but the other developers we have external to the council, they don't really have to follow this best practice guidance. Has any thought been given how we could persuade them or how we can incentivize them to follow this? Because I don't think we have anything really in planning terms, but do we have any other method of persuading or incentivizing the developers?
So I think on that, I mean, we've mentioned already the kind of influence that we can have. So Laura talked about our role in regeneration, and that means we have a lot of conversations with different partners at different stages when they're in very early days, for example, thinking about potential schemes. So we can make sure that this is that they're aware of this. We also have we run a developers forum, for example. We had our first meeting in October where we talk to the idea of that meeting is we talk to developers about kind of issues of the day, and this is the sort of thing we can promote in that sort of meeting. And we have similar meetings actually in different areas. So we have a kind of Southall meeting, one in Ealing. So it's kind of soft influence, I suppose, in a way. But we're also expecting, I think what's come out a lot in this conversation is actually a lot of the things in here are what we'd expect through good planning anyway. So it's about reinforcing that as well and making sure that we are seeing that in the schemes that come through. So again, we as planners, we can raise it at pre-app stage. Feels like it might be a bit late if they haven't thought about it at pre-app, but still we can still kind of make sure that they do think about that. And we can also ensure that the community review panel and design review are aware of it, and so they can ask about it in the discussions about how this has influenced what's been developed, and committee members can do the same. And so that shows it that it's an important part of the process.
So can I just add to that, Councillor Colley? So I just wanted to add, part of the reason that we also wanted to talk to developers throughout this engagement is to understand their views on this piece of work, and the developers that we have spoken to. So I'll just refer back to the engagement list. So through the survey and the one-to-one discussions that we've had with them, they have stated that they think that this is a piece of great work. It's important. They're keen for us to create a more consistent and clear approach for how they should be working with us to engage with our residents. So it's not like they're opposed to this. I think there is a willingness for them to look at this to help them guide their engagement strategies. But I think it's worth also noting, kind of going back to what I said earlier in reference to Councillor Martin's question, there is some testing that needs to be done, and that piece of work is going to come later on, and that testing will involve us working closely with our developer partners on using this piece of work.
Questions or comments someone would like to make? You introduce yourself, because I can't read your name from this.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Philomena, I'm Philomena. Thank you for the 3 important points which you mentioned, and you did say focus on the youth and maintain identity in place, which we discussed, because lots of new builders, they make the buildings, and it's not very good, because at the end of the day, they are representing the face of the town, and we are the one who's been looking every day, and if it's beautifully done with the good architect designing, then we feel happy in being in that place. So that's a very good point. I just wanted to talk about the women, because in the town, there's not much space for the women community, especially the age group of 24 to 52. And just a few days before, I was in the NHS meeting, and they had, in other council, they had brought up a project for women to build up, because most of them, the single mom, vulnerable women, they are on universal credit and being at home, but we don't have that space to build their skill training and to get them back to employability, or just to encourage them or to engage them. So most of the time they are limited to their own space, whatever space is being there with too. So community space, when you're talking about all these buildings, and so if you can consider them as a part of the community. Thank you.
And we'd be really pleased to, if you could provide an introduction to the groups that you're talking about, then we'd be more than happy to meet with them.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, I suppose then this brings the meeting to an end. So the date of the next meeting is the 28th of January 2025. 26, sorry. I was told don't get caught out with that, and I did get caught out. Yes, just 26. And I'd like to say thank you for coming, and the meeting is now finished.